At my son's wedding, my daughter-in-law demanded the keys to my apartment in front of 200 guests. When I refused, she slapped me so hard that my vision blurred. I did not scream. I did not hit her back. I simply wiped the blood from my lip, turned around, and made one phone call. 15 minutes later, a man appeared at the door of the ballroom, and when the bride and groom saw who it was, they fell to their knees and began to cry. My name is Harrison Caldwell, but everyone in Boston just calls me Harry. I am 70 years old, and for 40 years I worked as a general contractor, building the skyline of this city with my own two hands. I thought I had built a strong foundation for my family too, but I was wrong. Before I tell you how I taught my ungrateful son and his greedy wife a $2 million lesson, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments which city you are watching from. Your support helps me share my story. The silence in the grand ballroom of the Liberty Hotel was heavy enough to crush a man. Just seconds ago, the air had been filled with jazz music and the clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Now the only sound I could hear was the high-pitched ringing in my left ear. My cheek felt like it was on fire. I could taste the metallic tang of copper in my mouth. Blood. My own daughter-in-law, Courtney, had just struck me across the face. She stood there on the stage, her chest heaving underneath a $12,000 Vera Wang dress that I had paid for. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. The microphone was still clutched in her hand, amplifying her screeching voice so that it echoed off the high ceilings. "Give me the keys, you selfish old man," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "You promised us the penthouse. It is our wedding gift. Stop being senile and hand them over right now." I stood frozen near the wedding cake, holding my glass of wine. My hand was trembling, not from fear, but from a cold, dark shock that was spreading through my veins. I looked around the room. 200 guests were staring at me. These were my business partners, my neighbors, my old friends from the construction union. I saw pity in their eyes. I saw embarrassment. They were whispering behind their hands. "Look at poor Harry. He must be losing his mind. The bride is so stressed." I slowly lowered my wine glass to the table. The white tablecloth was spotless, unlike my reputation, which was being stained in real time. I looked at Courtney. I looked at the diamond necklace around her neck, which had belonged to my late wife, Martha. I had given it to her this morning as a gesture of love. Now it felt like I had placed a pearl necklace on a viper. "Courtney, why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice calm but raspy. "We discussed this. The Beacon Hill apartment is my home. It is the only thing I kept." She laughed, and the sound was sharp and cruel. "Your home! You are 70 years old, Harry. You belong in a facility where professionals can wipe your drool. You agreed to move out. You signed the papers. Do not try to back out now just because your brain is rotting." She was gaslighting me in front of everyone, painting me as a dementia patient to justify her greed. I felt a knot of nausea in my stomach, but I still had one hope, one person who would stop this madness. I turned my eyes to Brandon, my son. My only child. The boy I had raised alone after Martha passed away. The boy I had put through private school and university, working double shifts on freezing construction sites so he would never have to touch a shovel. Brandon was standing right next to her. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, but his posture was weak. "Brandon," I said softly, Tell her the truth, son. Tell her I never agreed to give up my home." The room waited. This was his moment. The moment to be a man. The moment to protect the father who had sacrificed everything for him. Brandon looked up, and for a split second our eyes met. I searched for my little boy in there, but all I saw was a coward. He looked away, staring down at his polished black shoes. He cleared his throat and spoke into the microphone, his voice shaking. "Dad, just give her the keys, okay? Stop making a scene. You know you are not well. We just want what is best for you. Please do not ruin our special day." My heart did not just break. It shattered into dust. It hurt more than the slap. It hurt more than the humiliation. My son had just sold me out. He had chosen a lie over his own father. The ringing in my ear stopped. The heat on my cheek turned into ice. I reached into my pocket and felt the cold, jagged metal of my house keys. The keys to the penthouse where Martha and I had spent our final years together. The sanctuary where I planned to live out my days in peace. Courtney held out her hand, snapping her fingers expectantly like she was calling a dog. "Come on, Harry, be a good boy." I looked at the keys in my hand. Then I looked at the expensive crystal wine glass on the table. I picked up the glass. The red wine swirled inside, dark as blood. I walked up to the stage. Courtney smiled, thinking I was coming to surrender. Instead, I raised the glass and let it drop. It hit the marble floor with a violent crash, shattering into 1,000 glittering shards. The red wine splattered across the hem of her white dress like a crime scene. Courtney gasped, stepping back. "You crazy old lunatic, look what you did." "I am not crazy, Courtney," I said, and my voice was no longer the voice of a tired old man. It was the voice of the general contractor who used to command 300 men on a job site. It was a voice of steel. "You want the keys?" I asked. "You can have them when I am dead. But until then, you and your husband are going to learn that you do not bite the hand that feeds you, because sometimes that hand strikes back." I turned my back on them. I ignored Brandon calling out, "Dad, wait." I ignored the gasps of the crowd. I walked straight out of the ballroom, through the heavy double doors, and into the cool lobby of the Liberty Hotel. My cheek was throbbing, but my mind was clear. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. I scrolled down to a number I had not called in years, but never deleted. It was listed under Henderson. I pressed call. It rang twice. "Hello," a deep voice answered. "Jameson, it is Harry," I said, wiping a drop of blood from my lip. "Harry, it has been a long time. Is everything all right?" "No," I said, staring at the closed doors of the ballroom where my family was celebrating my destruction. "I need you to activate Protocol 4 and bring the file. I am at the Liberty Hotel." There was a pause on the other end, then a low, dangerous chuckle. "Protocol 4. Are you sure, Harry? That is the nuclear option. Once we start this, there is no going back." I looked at my reflection in the glass door. I looked old. I looked tired. But in my eyes I saw a fire that had not burned in a long time. "I am sure," I said. "Come get them." I hung up the phone and checked my watch. They had 15 minutes left to enjoy their stolen happiness. I sat down on a velvet bench in the lobby and waited for the war to begin. The physical sensation of the slap was fading, but the burning in my heart was just beginning. I looked at Brandon. He was my boy, my flesh and blood. I waited for him to roar. I waited for him to grab his wife's hand and tell her that nobody touches his father. I waited for the anger that runs in the Caldwell bloodline to show up in his eyes, but the Caldwell fire had died in him long ago. Brandon stepped closer to me. He did not look at his wife, who was still panting with rage. He looked at me. He lowered his voice so the guests could not hear the shame spilling out of his mouth. "Dad, please just give her the keys. You are making this so difficult. She is under a lot of stress. You know how she gets when things do not go perfectly." I stared at him. I could not believe what I was hearing. She had just assaulted me. She had just humiliated the man who paid for the tuxedo he was wearing and the food he was eating. And he was worried about her stress levels. "You want me to reward her, Brandon? Is that what you are asking? You want me to hand over the deed to my home because she hit me?" Brandon shifted his weight nervously. He adjusted his bow tie, trying to look dignified but failing miserably. "It is not like that, Dad. Do not be dramatic. It is just an apartment. You have plenty of money. You have the pension. You can go anywhere. Courtney she has a vision for the space. She wants to use it for her studio. It means a lot to her brand." Her brand. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "And what about my dignity, Brandon? Does that mean anything to your brand?" He sighed, the sound of a man who just wanted the problem to go away, not a man who wanted to solve it. "You are being selfish, Dad. You are 70. You do not need a penthouse in Beacon Hill. It is wasted on you. Just let us have this start. Please, do not be an old miser." That was the moment. That was the exact second my son died. He did not die physically. He was standing right there, breathing and sweating. But the son I knew, the boy I loved, he vanished into thin air. As I looked at his weak chin and his shifting eyes, the ballroom melted away. Suddenly, I was back in 1995. It was a freezing November morning in Boston. The wind was cutting through my jacket like a knife. I was on the 42nd floor of the Prudential Tower construction site. I was tired. My back was screaming in pain from lifting steel beams for 12 hours straight. I looked down at the corner of the site where a little boy was sitting on a toolbox. It was Brandon. He was 5 years old. I could not afford a babysitter that day because every dollar I made was going into his college fund. He was wrapped in my oversized wool coat, playing with a plastic hammer. I remembered walking over to him, my hands covered in callus and concrete dust. I picked him up. He was heavy even then. He wrapped his little arms around my neck and buried his face in my shoulder. "Daddy, I am cold," he had whispered. "I know, son, I know. But we have to stay here a little longer. Daddy is building the future for you. I am building a world where you will never be cold, where you will never have to lift a heavy thing in your life." I held him tight, shielding him from the wind with my own body. I took the cold so he could have the warmth. I took the pain so he could have the comfort. I destroyed my back and my knees so he could stand tall. And now here he was, standing tall and using that height to look down on me. The memory faded, and the bright lights of the chandelier brought me back to the cruel reality. The boy on the toolbox was gone. The man in front of me was a stranger who was willing to throw me into the street to please a woman who despised him. I looked down at the wine glass in my hand. It was trembling. Not from age, but from a rage so pure it felt like white heat. I looked Brandon in the eye. I wanted him to see the decision I was making. I wanted him to see the door closing forever. "You are right, Brandon," I said quietly. "I am being selfish. I have been selfish for 30 years. I was selfish when I worked double shifts to pay for your tuition. I was selfish when I sold the family home to buy you this life. But I am done being selfish now." Brandon smiled nervously, thinking he had won, thinking I was capitulating. "So you will give us the keys." "Great, Dad. I knew you would come around." "No," I said. I raised the glass. I did not throw it at them. That would be assault. I simply opened my hand and let gravity do the rest. The glass hit the floor between us. The sound was like a gunshot. Red wine splashed onto Brandon's polished shoes. He jumped back in surprise. "What the hell?" "Dad," he shouted. "That is the last thing you will ever get from me," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I do not have a son. My son died a long time ago. You are just a man who shares his last name." I did not wait for his response. I did not wait for Courtney to start screaming again. I turned around. My legs felt heavy, but my soul felt strangely light. Every step away from them was a step back toward myself. I could hear the murmurs of the crowd parting like the Red Sea to let me pass. They were looking at a man who had just lost his family. But they were wrong. I had not lost my family. I had simply cut off a gangrenous limb before it could kill me. I walked past the gift table piled high with presents I had paid for. I walked past the open bar where guests were drinking liquor I had bought. I kept my eyes fixed on the exit sign. It was glowing red in the distance. As I pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out of the ballroom, the air in the hallway felt different. It was cleaner. I was alone now, truly alone for the first time in decades. But as I reached for my phone to call Jameson, I realized something. I would rather be alone with my dignity than surrounded by people who sold me for a set of keys. I walked toward the hotel lobby, leaving the wreckage of my past behind me. It was time to start the war. I walked out of the hotel and the cold Boston air, a physical blow. It should have cooled the burning sensation on my cheek where she had slapped me, but instead, it just made the skin feel tight and raw. I did not wait for the valet. I walked straight to the self-parking garage, my tuxedo shoes clicking loudly on the concrete. I found my truck parked in the corner. It was a 1999 Ford F-150. It was rusted around the wheel wells and the paint was fading, but the engine purred like a kitten. It was reliable, unlike my family. I climbed into the cab, and the smell of old leather and sawdust wrapped around me. This truck was my office, my sanctuary, and my partner for 20 years. I gripped the steering wheel, my hands shaking uncontrollably, now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my heart rate. I needed to go home. I needed to be in my own space, surrounded by my own things. I needed to look at the photo of Martha that sat on the mantelpiece and ask her what the hell I was supposed to do now. I drove out of the garage and onto the street. The city was beautiful at night, the lights reflecting off the Charles River, but I saw none of it. I drove on autopilot, my mind replaying the scene in the ballroom over and over again. The slap, the silence, the look of absolute weakness on my son, his face. How had I raised a man who would stand by and watch his father be assaulted? How had I been so blind to the monster he had married? I turned onto my street in Beacon Hill. My building was a classic brownstone, 4 stories of red brick and black iron railings. I had bought it as a shell 10 years ago. It had been a crumbling ruin condemned by the city. Everyone told me to tear it down. But I saw the bones. I saw the history. I spent 2 years restoring it brick by brick. I reinforced the foundation, I replaced the wiring, I hand-carved the crown molding in the lobby. I knew every inch of this structure better than I knew the back of my own hand. It was not just a building. It was my masterpiece. And on the top floor was the penthouse where I lived. The place I was supposed to die. I parked the truck in the loading zone out front. I did not care about the ticket. I just wanted to get inside. I walked up the granite steps, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. I was home, Basum. The world was crazy out there, but in here, I was safe. In here, I was the king of my castle. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my key ring. The brass keys jingled in the quiet night. I selected the master key, the one that opened the heavy oak front door. I slid it into the lock. It went in smooth, just like always. But when I tried to turn it, it stopped. I frowned. I wiggled it slightly, thinking maybe the tumblers were just cold. But it would not budge. It felt like hitting a wall. That is strange, I whispered to myself. I had installed these locks myself. They were high-security cylinders designed to last a lifetime. They did not just jam. I pulled the key out and looked at it. It was the right key. I tried again. Nothing. Then I looked up at the electronic keypad mounted above the handle. Usually it glowed with a soft blue light, indicating the system was in standby mode. But tonight, the light was different. It was pulsing a slow, angry red. I felt a cold drop of sweat slide down my back. This was not a mechanical failure. This was a system override. I punched in my personal code, 1952, my birth year. The keypad let out a harsh buzz. Access denied. I tried again. Maybe my fingers were shaking too much. 1952. Enter. Buzz. Access denied. System lockout active. I took a step back, staring at the door. My own door. The door I had sanded and stained with my own hands. It was refusing to let me in. Open the door, I shouted, pounding my fist against the wood. My voice echoed down the empty street. I know you are in there. Open this damn door. For a moment there was only silence. Then the small intercom speaker next to the keypad crackled to life. Go away, Harry. The voice was tinny and distorted by the speaker, but the tone was unmistakable. It was Courtney. I froze. She was supposed to be at the wedding. She was supposed to be cutting the cake and dancing the first dance. How was she here? And then the realization hit me like a sledgehammer. She had left immediately. While I was walking out the front door, she must have slipped out the back and raced here. Or maybe she never even planned to stay at the reception. Courtney, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Open this door immediately. This is my house. I have the deed. I have the title. You are trespassing. I heard a short, sharp laugh through the speaker. It sounded like glass breaking. Not anymore, Harry. You really are losing it, aren't you? You signed the gift deed. Remember, we have the papers. This building belongs to us now, and since you are no longer the owner, you have no right to enter. I did not sign anything, I roared. You are lying. Oh, Harry, she sighed, sounding bored. You will sign. Or maybe you already did and you just forgot. That is the thing about dementia. It makes you forget so many things, like where you live, or who owns what. Don't worry. We will send a copy of the paperwork to your lawyer in the morning. But for now, you need to leave. You are frightening the neighbors. Where is Brandon? I asked. Put my son on the line. He is busy, she said. He is inside popping a bottle of Dom Perignon. We are celebrating our new home. He does not want to talk to you, Harry. He is very upset about the scene you caused. He thinks you need professional help. We are doing this for your own good. You are not safe to live alone anymore. I stood there on the sidewalk, shaking with rage. But it was not just rage. It was clarity. This was not a tantrum. This was not a bride being a diva. This was a heist. A meticulously planned, executed heist. They had the locksmiths on standby. They had the paperwork forged. They had the dementia narrative ready to go. They had planned to humiliate me at the wedding, provoke a reaction, and then use that reaction to justify locking me out. It was a trap, and I had walked right into it. I want my things, I said. My clothes, my documents. My wife is pictures. Give me my things and I will leave. Oh, that junk, Courtney said. We are doing a full renovation, Harry. We are going for a modern minimalist look. Your old dusty furniture and those creepy old photos didn't fit the vibe. My blood ran cold. What did you do? I helped you pack, she said, sweetness dripping from her voice. Since you are moving to a facility anyway, you won't need much. We hired a moving crew. They were very efficient. They cleared the place out while we were at the ceremony. Where is it? I whispered. Check the alleyway, she said. But you better hurry. The garbage truck comes at 6 a.m. Good night, Harry. Don't come back. The intercom clicked off. The red light on the keypad continued to pulse, mocking me. I turned and ran toward the narrow alleyway that ran along the side of the building. My heart was pounding in my throat. Please, God, no. Not the pictures. Take the money, take the furniture, but please not the pictures. I rounded the corner and skidded to a stop. There, under the pale yellow light of a flickering street lamp, was the wreckage of my life. It looked like a landfill. Dozens of black, heavy-duty garbage bags, were piled high against the brick wall. My leather armchair, the one I had sat in for 20 years, was overturned in a puddle of muddy water. The fabric was slashed. My drafting table, the one where I had designed this very building, was broken in half, splintered wood sticking up like jagged teeth. I scrambled over the bags, tearing them open. My clothes, my suits, my military uniform from Vietnam, all of it stuffed into trash bags like refuse. Then I saw it. Lying face down on the wet pavement was the large oil painting of Martha. We had commissioned it for our 25th anniversary. She was wearing her blue dress, smiling that soft smile that used to make all my troubles disappear. I fell to my knees in the mud. I didn't care about my tuxedo pants. I reached out and turned the painting over. The frame was cracked. The canvas was torn right across her face, and someone I knew exactly who had taken a black marker and drawn a mustache on her beautiful smile. A sound escaped my throat. It was a sound I had never made before. Half sob, half growl. It was the sound of a wounded animal. I touched the torn canvas. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely feel the texture of the paint. They hadn't just stolen my house. They had desecrated my sanctuary. They had tried to erase my history. I looked up at the side of the building. I could see the light in the penthouse window. I could see two silhouettes moving against the blind. They were clinking glasses. They were laughing. They were celebrating their victory over the stupid old man. I sat there in the alleyway, hugging the ruined painting of my dead wife. The mud soaked into my knees. The cold wind bit into my skin. But as the initial wave of grief passed, something else took its place. Something cold and hard and sharp. It was the mind of the general contractor. I stopped crying. I wiped my face with a muddy hand. They thought they had won because they changed the locks. They thought they controlled this building because they had a piece of paper and a keypad. But they were tourists here. I was the architect. I looked at the brick wall next to me. I knew what was behind it. I knew where the main water line entered the building. I knew where the electrical junction box was located in the basement sublevel. I knew about the ventilation shaft that ran from the boiler room straight up to the penthouse master bedroom. I knew secrets about this building that were not on any blueprint. I stood up slowly. My knees cracked. I picked up the painting of Martha and carried it to my truck, placing it gently on the passenger seat. Then I went back and grabbed my old toolbox, the one they had thrown out with the trash. I opened it. My hammer was there. My wrenches. My wire cutters. I looked up at the lighted window one last time. Enjoy the champagne, Courtney. Enjoy the heat. Enjoy the electricity. Because you are living in a machine that I built. And I am about to take the controls back. I climbed into my truck and locked the doors. I wasn't going to break in tonight. That would get me arrested. No. I was going to wait. I was going to let them get comfortable. And then I was going to bring the house down around them. Not with dynamite, but with the one thing they didn't have: authority. I reclined the seat of the truck and pulled my old coat over me. I wasn't going anywhere. My watch began. The engine of the Ford F-150 ticked as it cooled down, a metallic sound that seemed deafening in the silence of the parking lot. The dashboard clock read 3:14 in the morning. Outside the frosted windows, Boston was asleep, buried under a blanket of damp, freezing darkness. The thermometer claimed it was 41 degrees, but inside the cab it felt colder. It felt like the temperature of a grave. I pulled my old wool coat tighter around my shoulders. It smelled of diesel and sawdust, a scent that usually brought me comfort, but tonight it just smelled like failure. My stomach gave a painful growl, reminding me that I had not eaten since breakfast the day before. I reached into the plastic bag on the passenger seat and pulled out the sandwich I had bought at a 24-hour gas station. Turkey on rye bread. It was wrapped in plastic that crinkled loudly. I took a bite. The bread was stale and dry as dust. The turkey was slimy. It tasted like cardboard and preservatives. I chewed slowly, forcing myself to swallow. Just 12 hours ago, I had been sitting in front of a plate of lobster thermidor and truffle risotto. I had paid $200 a plate for that food. I had paid for the open bar where guests were drowning themselves in premium scotch. And here I was, the man who signed the checks, eating a $4 sandwich that tasted like despair. I looked out the windshield at the city skyline across the river. The lights of the skyscrapers shimmered on the black water. I took another bite of the dry sandwich and pointed it at a tall glass building in the distance. The Prudential Tower. I poured the foundation for the west wing of that building in 1982. I pointed at another building, the Hancock. I supervised the reinforcement of the lower levels in '95. I looked at the city I had helped build. I looked at the millions of tons of concrete and steel that stood tall because of my sweat and my calculations. And then I thought about my bank accounts. If anyone looked at me right now huddled in a rusted truck with a 3-day beard and a stained tuxedo shirt, they would see a homeless old man, a loser, a derelict. They would not see Harrison Caldwell. They would not send the man whose investment portfolio was worth over $18 million. They would not see the man who owned 3 commercial warehouses in South Boston and a stake in the very hotel where I was humiliated tonight. I had spent my whole life being the gray man, the man in the work boots, not the man in the suit. I drove this old truck not because I had to, but because I liked it. I lived simply because I valued substance over flash. I had hidden my wealth to protect my son from becoming spoiled, to teach him the value of hard work. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. It sounded like a bark in the quiet cab. Good job, Harry. You hid it so well that he thinks you are nothing. You hid it so well that he thinks stripping you of a single apartment will leave you destitute. You protected him from the reality of money so much that he became a slave to it. I looked over at the passenger seat. The painting of Martha was leaning against the door, carefully covered with my spare flannel shirt to keep it warm. I reached out and touched where her face would be under the fabric. I am sorry, Martha, I whispered. I failed him. I failed us. I let a wolf into the henhouse because I wanted him to be happy. And now she has her teeth in his throat, and he is wagging his tail. I finished the sandwich and crumpled the plastic wrapper into a ball. The anger was settling now. The initial shock of the betrayal was fading, replaced by a cold, mechanical focus. It was the same feeling I used to get when a blueprint was wrong, or a structural beam was cracking. Panic does not fix a building. Logic fixes a building. Action fixes a building. They had the keys. They had the physical doors. They had the paperwork. But they forgot one thing. They forgot who built the place. I reached behind the driver's seat and pulled out my laptop bag. It was a heavy-duty, ruggedized laptop, the kind used on construction sites to run architectural software. I opened it, and the screen flickered to life, casting a ghostly blue light over my face. I did not need their Wi-Fi. I had a satellite uplink in the truck for remote job sites. I waited for the connection bars to turn green. Then I opened a program that Courtney and Brandon did not even know existed. Most people think a smart home is just an app on their phone. They think it is voice commands and fancy light switches. They do not understand that underneath the user interface there is a nervous system. There are miles of cables, servers, relays, and command lines. And when I renovated the penthouse, I did not just install a consumer system. I installed an industrial-grade building management system, the kind used in banks and high-security offices. I typed in the IP address of the building. The login screen appeared. Username? Password. Courtney had reset the user passwords. She thought she was smart. She thought locking me out of the app meant locking me out of the system. But she was just a user. I was the administrator. I was the root. I typed in the installer credentials. These were hard-coded into the server in the basement. They could not be changed unless you physically went down there and wiped the motherboard. And I knew for a fact Brandon did not even know where the server room was. Access granted. The text flashed green. A map of the penthouse appeared on my screen. I saw every sensor, every switch, every connected device. I saw the thermostat. They had cranked it up to 75 degrees, burning my oil, wasting my money. I saw the smart fridge. It was open. And then I clicked on the tab marked video and audio feeds. When I lived there, I kept the cameras off. I valued privacy. But the microphones were part of the glass break sensors and the smoke detectors. They were always listening, waiting for the frequency of danger. And the cameras hidden in the motion detectors were designed for security when the house was empty. I typed a command to override the privacy mode. Override authorized. Activating arrays 1 through 8. The screen split into a grid of black and white squares. Then, one by one, they flickered into color. My heart hammered against my ribs. It felt invasive. It felt wrong to spy. But then I remembered the slap. I remembered the locks. I remembered Martha is painting face down in the mud. I leaned closer to the screen. There they were. They were in the living room. My living room. Courtney was lying on my Italian leather sofa, her feet up on the coffee table, still wearing her wedding dress. The skirt was stained with wine and dirt. She was holding a bottle of champagne, drinking straight from the neck. Brandon was pacing back and forth. He had taken off his jacket, and his tie was undone. He looked pale. He looked like a man who was waiting for the other shoe to drop. The audio feed crackled and hissed, then clarified. Their voices filled the cab of my truck. "Worry about him," Brandon Courtney was saying, her voice slurring slightly. "He is sleeping in a shelter by now. Or maybe he curled up on a park bench. Who cares?" "He is my dad," Courtney Brandon said, running a hand through his hair. "We literally threw him in the garbage. And that thing with the painting, that was too far. He loved that painting." "Oh, stop whining," she snapped, sitting up. "We had to break him. That is the only way this works. If we gave him an inch, he would take a mile. Now he knows he has no power. He knows he is nothing without us." I watched Brandon stop pacing. He looked at her. "But the deed," he said. "He didn't sign the transfer, Courtney. You lied to the police. You told them he signed it. What happens when he gets a lawyer?" Courtney laughed. It was a dark, ugly sound. "With what money, Brandon?" I checked his checking account statement on the kitchen counter before we threw it out. "He has $4,000 to his name. Lawyers cost money. By the time he figures out how to apply for legal aid, we will have already mortgaged this place." I stared at the screen. $4,000 in the checking account. That was the account I used for groceries and gas. She hadn't looked at the trust funds. She hadn't looked at the offshore holdings. She saw what she wanted to see. "A poor old man, I am going to sell it all," she continued. "The furniture is gone. Tomorrow I am selling his truck if he left it on the street. I am selling his tools. I am going to erase every trace of him. And with the loan from the house, I am going to pay off Vinny." Vinny. My ears perked up. The name hung in the air like a cloud of toxic gas. Vinny, Brandon asked, his voice trembling. "I thought you said you owed the credit card company." "Who is Vinny?" Courtney went silent. She took a long swig of champagne. "It does not matter," she said, waving her hand. "Just know that we need $2 million by Friday, or I am not the only one who is going to get hurt." I sat back in the seat of my truck. The cold was gone. The hunger was gone. So that was it. It wasn't just greed. It was desperation. She was in debt to a loan shark, and she was using my house, my legacy, to pay for her mistakes. I looked at the record button on my screen. I moved the cursor over it. Click. Recording started. I watched them for a moment longer. The predator and the coward. They thought they were alone. They thought they had won. I reached for the unfinished crust of my sandwich and took a bite. It didn't taste like sawdust anymore. It tasted like ammunition. I sat there in the dark cab of my truck, illuminated only by the ghostly blue glow of the laptop screen. My breath formed small clouds of white mist in the freezing air, but I could not feel the cold anymore. My entire world had narrowed down to the 12-inch rectangle of pixels in front of me. I was watching a horror movie, but the monsters were not wearing masks. They were wearing wedding clothes, and they were drinking my vintage champagne in the living room I had built with my own hands. The camera feed was high definition. I could see the sweat glistening on Brandon's forehead. I could see the wild, manic look in Courtney's eyes. She was pacing around the room, kicking off her heels and tossing them onto my mahogany coffee table. She looked like a predator who had just taken down a large prey and was adrenaline drunk on the kill. On the screen, Brandon slumped onto the sofa, loosening his tie. He looked pale. He looked like a man who was waiting for the police to kick down the door. "Courtney, please stop drinking," he said, his voice trembling slightly through the laptop speakers. "We need to think. What if he comes back? What if he calls the cops? He is not just going to disappear." Courtney laughed, and the sound sent a shiver down my spine. It was a harsh, metallic sound, devoid of any warmth. "He is not coming back, Brandon," she said, pouring herself another glass. "He is a broken old man. Did you see his face when I slapped him? He was terrified. He is probably crying in a shelter right now, wondering what he did wrong." She took a long sip and then pointed the glass at Brandon. "Besides, we do not have a choice. We need the money by tomorrow noon. Vinny called me again this morning. He said if I do not have the $500,000 plus interest, he is going to start breaking fingers. And he won't start with mine. He will start with yours." I leaned closer to the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. $500,000. So that was the number. That was the price of my dignity. My daughter-in-law was not just a spoiled brat. She was a degenerate gambler in debt to the mob, and she was using my life savings to buy her way out of a hole she had dug herself. Brandon buried his face in his hands. "I cannot believe we did this," he moaned. "We stole his house, Courtney. We forged his signature. This is a felony. If anyone finds out, we are going to prison for 20 years. "Relax," Courtney snapped. "Nobody is going to find out. We control the narrative. Remember. Harry is senile. Harry is losing his mind. That is what we tell everyone. That is what we tell the bank when we sign the mortgage papers tomorrow morning. We are his power of attorney. We are acting in his best interest to secure his assets. It is perfect." She spun around, dancing to a song only she could hear. "By tomorrow afternoon, the money will be wired to Vinny. The debt will be gone. And we will have this penthouse and the rest of his portfolio to play with. We will be rich, Brandon. Finally rich." I watched my son. I waited for him to stand up. I waited for him to say that fraud and theft were too high a price to pay. But he just sat there looking defeated. "But he is my dad." "Courtney," he whispered. "He has always been good to me. He worked hard for this." "He is an obstacle." Courtney interrupted, her voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. "He is a stubborn, tight-fisted old obstacle who was sitting on millions while we struggled. He owes us this. And honestly, Brandon, you should be thanking me. I made sure he won't be a problem for much longer." Brandon looked up. "What do you mean?" Courtney walked over to the kitchen counter. On the video feed, I saw her pick up a small orange pill bottle. My heart stopped. That was my heart medication. I had a condition called atrial fibrillation. I needed those beta blockers to keep my heart rhythm steady. Without them, I was at risk of a stroke or a heart attack, especially under stress. She rattled the bottle, shaking the pills like a maraca. You know how he has been complaining about feeling tired lately? She said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. You know how he gets breathless when he walks up the stairs? Brandon stared at the bottle. Yeah. He said he thought his condition was getting worse. It is not his condition, Courtney giggled. It is his vitamins. I stopped breathing. The air in the truck cab seemed to vanish. What did you do? Brandon asked, his voice barely a whisper. Courtney tossed the bottle to him. He caught it with fumbling hands. Open it, she said. Brandon unscrewed the cap and poured a few pills into his palm. They look like his heart pills, he said. They look like them, Courtney corrected. But they are just sugar pills and caffeine. I swapped them out 3 weeks ago. I felt a physical blow to my chest. My hand flew to my heart. For weeks I had been feeling weak. My heart would race for no reason. I had been getting dizzy spells. I thought it was just old age. I thought my body was finally giving up, but it was murder. It was slow, calculated murder. She continued, her voice full of pride, as if she were explaining a clever recipe. Every time he takes one, he thinks he is protecting his heart, but he is actually stressing it. That is why he was so weak today. That is why he didn't fight back. Give it another month, Brandon. Maybe 2. Nature will take its course. He will have a massive stroke or a cardiac arrest. And then we won't have to worry about the nursing home fees either. We will inherit everything scot-free. Brandon dropped the bottle. The pills scattered across the expensive Persian rug. You are trying to kill him, he stammered. Courtney, that is insane. It is practical, she snapped, her eyes blazing. Do you want to be poor, Brandon? Do you want Vinny to break your legs? Do you want to lose me? Because that is the alternative. It is either him or us. Pick a side. Brandon looked at the pills on the floor. He looked at his wife. He looked at the luxury apartment around him. Then slowly, painfully, he knelt down. He began to pick up the pills. He put them back in the bottle one by one. He stood up and placed the bottle back on the counter. Just make sure he doesn't find out, he said. I closed my laptop. I could not watch anymore. If I watched for one more second, I was going to drive my truck through the front door of that building and kill them both with my bare hands. I sat in the darkness, trembling. But this time it was not from the cold. It was not from the shock. It was from the realization that the man I was yesterday was dead. Harrison Caldwell, the loving father, was dead. He died the moment his son picked up those poison pills and put them back in the bottle. They wanted a heart attack. They wanted a stroke. They wanted a weak old man who would fade away quietly. I reached for my phone. My hand was steady now. My heart was beating with a slow, powerful rhythm. It was the rhythm of a war drum. I dialed the number for the private investigation firm I used for background checks on my construction crews. Hello, a sleepy voice answered. I need a team, I said. I need forensic accountants. I need a toxicologist. And I need a security detail. Who is this? The voice asked. This is the man who owns the city, I said. And I am about to tear a building down. I ended the call. I looked at the dark silhouette of my home against the night sky. They thought they were living in a penthouse. But they were wrong. They were living in a prison cell, and I had just started welding the bars shut. The sun was just beginning to bleed through the gray clouds over South Boston when I pulled my truck into the parking lot of Sully's Diner. It was a small, grease-stained establishment tucked between a dry cleaner and a hardware store. The neon sign above the door flickered with a buzzing sound, missing the letter N, so it just read DIER. To most people, it looked like a place to avoid, but to me, it was sacred ground. It was where the real business of this city was conducted over black coffee and scrambled eggs, not in the glass towers downtown. I walked inside, the bell above the door chiming softly. The air smelled of bacon grease and stale cigarette smoke from decades past. I slid into the corner booth, the one furthest from the window, where the shadows were deep. My bones ached from sleeping in the truck cab. My tuxedo shirt was wrinkled and stained with sweat, and the bruise on my cheek had turned a dark, angry purple. I looked like a brawler who had lost a fight in an alleyway. I ordered a black coffee and waited. I watched the door, my hand resting on the ruggedized laptop bag next to me. Inside that bag was the end of my son's life as he knew it. Inside that bag was the evidence that would turn a family dispute into a federal case. 10 minutes later, the door opened again. A tall man in a long charcoal wool coat walked in. He had silver hair neatly combed back, and a face carved from granite. He moved with a quiet authority that made the few other patrons look down at their plates instinctively. It was Jameson. To the world, he was the Honorable Justice Jameson of the Massachusetts Supreme Court, a man who held the power of life and death in his gavel. But to me, he was just Jimmy the kid who used to work summer jobs on my framing crew back in the 80s. He saw me in the corner, and his eyes narrowed slightly. He did not wave. He simply walked over and slid into the booth opposite me. He took off his leather gloves and placed them neatly on the table. Then he looked at my face. He looked at the bruise on my cheek and the redness in my eyes. "Who hit you, Harry?" he asked. His voice was low and calm, but it carried a dangerous edge. It was the same tone he used when he was sentencing a violent criminal. I did not answer immediately. I took a sip of the bitter coffee, letting the heat burn my throat. "I need a favor, Jimmy," I said. He looked at me, his steel gray eyes searching my face. "You do not ask for favors, Harry. In 40 years, you have never asked me for a single thing. Not when I was a struggling lawyer, not when I ran for office, and not when I took the bench. So if you are asking now, it must be the end of the world." "It feels like it," I admitted. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Does this have to do with that bruise? Does this have to do with the fact that you look like you slept in a ditch?" "I slept in my truck," I corrected him. "Because I was locked out of my own home." Jameson frowned. "Locked out? I thought you gave the penthouse to Brandon and his wife." "That is what the gossip column in the Globe said this morning. A generous wedding gift from a retiring tycoon." I reached into my bag and pulled out the laptop. I did not open it yet. I just put my hand on the lid. "Do you remember 1990, Jimmy? Do you remember the collapse at the government center garage?" Jameson went still. The noise of the diner seemed to fade away. "I remember," he said softly. "I remember the main support beam giving way. I remember being trapped under 2 tons of concrete. I remember the dust filling my lungs and the darkness closing in. Everyone else ran, Harry. The fire department said the structure was too unstable to enter. They told us to wait for the heavy equipment." "But you didn't wait." "No," I said. "I didn't. You crawled into that hole with a hydraulic jack and a prayer." Jameson continued, his eyes distant. "You held that beam up with your own shoulder until I could slide out. You broke your collarbone and 3 ribs saving me. You gave me my life, Harry. I have never forgotten that." "I am not asking for repayment," I said, opening the laptop. "I am asking for justice, because the people who are supposed to love me are trying to bury me. And this time there is no hydraulic jack to hold up the weight." I turned the screen toward him. I opened the video file from the night before. "Watch this," I said, "and listen closely." I pressed play. The video of Courtney and Brandon in my living room began to play. The audio was crisp and clear. Jameson watched in silence. He watched them drinking my champagne. He listened to Courtney bragging about the forgery. He listened to her admit that she owed money to a loan shark named Vinny. His face remained impassive, a professional mask he had perfected over decades in the courtroom. But I saw his jaw muscle tighten when Courtney called me a senile old fool. Then the video reached the part about the pills. I watched Jameson, his eyes widen slightly. It was a micro-expression, but for him it was a scream of shock. On the screen, Courtney tossed the pill bottle to Brandon. She explained how she had swapped my heart medication for sugar and caffeine. She explained how she was waiting for nature to take its course, so they could inherit everything. And then we saw Brandon, my son, the boy I had raised, pick up the pills and put them back in the bottle. We heard him agree to the plan. I paused the video. The silence at the booth was deafening. Jameson was staring at the frozen image of Brandon holding the pill bottle. His face had lost all color. "He looked sick, Harry," he whispered. "That is attempted murder," I finished for him. My voice was steady, but inside I was dying 1,000 deaths. It is not just fraud, Jimmy. It is not just elder abuse. They are actively trying to kill me. Jameson closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them, the friend was gone. The judge was present, and he was furious. He slammed his hand down on the table. The cutlery rattled and the coffee cups jumped in their saucers. A few people turned to look, but Jameson did not care. "This is not a civil matter," he growled, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "I came here thinking you needed an injunction. I thought we were going to file a restraining order or a lawsuit to get your property back. But this is a felony. This is conspiracy to commit murder." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a heavy black phone. "I am not calling a lawyer, Harry. I am calling the district attorney, and I am calling the chief of police." I reached out and put a hand on his arm, stopping him. "Not yet, Jimmy," I said. He looked at me incredulously. "What do you mean, not yet?" "They are poisoning you. They are planning to mortgage your property to pay off the mob. We need to arrest them now. If we arrest them now, they will claim it was a joke," I said. "They will claim the recording was taken out of context. They will say the pills were just a prank. They have a good lawyer. You know how the system works. Without the physical evidence, without the signed mortgage papers, it is just my word against theirs." Jameson slowly lowered the phone. He knew I was right. He knew the law required absolute proof. "So what is the play, Harry?" he asked. "I need them to commit the act I said. I need them to think they have won. Courtney wants me to come over tonight to sign a confirmation of the gift deed. She needs my signature to satisfy the bank, because the forged one won't pass a deep audit." "You are not going back there," Jameson said, shaking his head. "It is too dangerous." "I have to," I said. "I need to get the pills back. I need to secure the bottle as physical evidence for the lab, and I need them to hand me the fraudulent papers in front of witnesses." I looked him in the eye. "I need you to be the cavalry, Jimmy. I need you to bring the warrant. I need you to bring the police. But you have to wait for my signal. I want to look them in the eye when the handcuffs go on." Jameson looked at the laptop screen one last time. He looked at the face of Brandon, the boy he had seen grow up, the boy he had sent birthday cards to. The betrayal was almost too much to comprehend. He looked back at me and nodded slowly. "Okay, Harry. We do it your way. But I am not just sending a patrol car. If they are dealing with loan sharks and poisoning federal judges, friend, I am bringing the SWAT team." He pulled out a notepad and a gold fountain pen. "Tell me exactly what time you are going in," he said. 7 p.m., I answered. Jameson wrote it down. He tore the page off and folded it into his pocket. "At 7:15 I will be at your door," he said. "And Harry, when I walk through that door, I am not coming as a friend. I am coming as the wrath of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts." He stood up and buttoned his coat. He placed a hand on my shoulder and squeezed it tightly. It was the only comfort he could offer. "You are a better man than me, Harry," he said softly. "If that were my son, I would not be calling the police. I would be using that hammer in your truck." He turned and walked out of the diner, his coat billowing behind him like the robes of judgment. I watched him go. I took one last sip of the cold coffee. It tasted like ash. The legal trap was set. The police were on board. Everything was in motion. But as I sat there in the shadows of the diner, I realized the hardest part was yet to come. I had to go back to that house. I had to look my son in the face, and I had to let him believe he had succeeded in killing me right up until the moment I destroyed him. I closed the laptop and zipped up the bag. It was time to get a haircut. It was time to shave. It was time to put on a suit. If I was going to attend my own funeral, I wanted to look my best. After leaving the diner, I drove straight to the financial district. The city was waking up now. The streets were filling with men in suits rushing to their glass towers to move money around on computer screens. I watched them with a grim sort of detachment. They thought they understood power because they could move numbers on a spreadsheet. But they did not understand the kind of power I was about to exercise. I was about to turn off the tap. I parked my truck in front of the First National Bank of Boston. The valet looked at my rusted Ford and then at my wrinkled tuxedo shirt, but he didn't say a word. He saw the way I walked. He saw the look in my eye. He took the keys and stepped aside. I pushed through the revolving doors, and the smell of money hit me. It is a specific smell. It smells like polished marble and air conditioning and quiet desperation. I didn't go to the teller line. I walked straight to the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. I didn't need an appointment. When you have as much money sitting in their vault as I did, you don't wait in line. The elevator doors opened into a plush reception area. The secretary looked up, ready to tell me I was in the wrong place, but then she froze. "Mr. Caldwell," she stammered. "We were not expecting you. Mr. Sterling is in a meeting." "Tell him Harry is here," I said, not breaking stride. "Tell him I am here to stop a robbery." 2 minutes later, I was sitting in the corner office of Arthur Sterling, the branch manager. Arthur was a man I had known for 30 years. I had built his first house. I had built his vacation home on the Cape. We had smoked cigars together when his first son was born. He looked at me now with genuine concern. He saw the bruise on my face. He saw the mud on my shoes. "Harry, what happened?" Arthur asked, leaning forward over his mahogany desk. "You look like you went 12 rounds with a concrete mixer." "I need you to listen to me, Arthur," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "And I need you to do exactly what I say without asking questions. Because if you ask questions, I might have to tell you the truth. And if I tell you the truth, you will have to call the police, and I am not ready for that yet." Arthur nodded slowly. He knew me. He knew I didn't play games. "I am listening, Harry. I want you to freeze everything I said." Arthur blinked. "What do you mean, everything?" "I mean everything, Arthur. The checking accounts, the savings, the investment dividends, the trust fund access, the credit cards. I want a total lockdown on every single asset attached to my Social Security number. I want a red flag on the system so big that it can be seen from space." Arthur frowned, tapping his pen on the desk. "Harry, you know I can do that, but it will freeze you out too. You won't be able to buy a cup of coffee. And if you have authorized users on your accounts like your son—" "That is the point," I interrupted. "I want the authorized users cut off, immediately. I want the cards to decline. I want the checks to bounce. I want the ATMs to eat the plastic." Arthur looked at his computer screen. "I see here that there was a request pending for a large transfer this morning," he said, his voice professional but wary. "A mortgage inquiries headed by a Mrs. Courtney Caldwell, acting as power of attorney. They are trying to expedite a line of credit against your Beacon Hill property." "Stop it," I said. "Kill it. Flag it for fraud review. Put it in administrative limbo." Arthur typed rapidly on his keyboard. The sound was like gunfire in the quiet office. "I am initiating a level 5 security freeze," he said. "It requires biometric confirmation." I stood up and leaned over the desk. I placed my thumb on the scanner. It beeped. A green light flashed. "It is done," Arthur said, looking up. "The accounts are locked. Nobody gets a dime without you physically standing here in this office. Not even the Pope." I sat back and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was done. The financial oxygen had been cut off. Now I just had to wait for them to start suffocating, while I was sitting in that cool, quiet office staring at the city below. My son Brandon was walking into Tiffany & Co. on Newbury Street. I knew this because I had a tracker on his phone which was part of the family plan I paid for. I could imagine the scene perfectly. He was trying to buy his way out of guilt. He was trying to buy forgiveness with my money. Brandon walked up to the glass counter. The store was bright and smelled of expensive perfume. He was wearing his tuxedo from the night before, minus the tie, trying to look like a wealthy playboy who had just had a wild night. But he looked ragged. His eyes were bloodshot from the stress and the alcohol. "Can I help you, sir?" the sales clerk asked, eyeing him suspiciously. "I need a ring," Brandon said, his voice too loud. "A diamond ring. Big. It is an apology gift for my wife." The clerk smiled, the practiced smile of someone who sold shiny rocks to guilty men for a living. "Of course, sir. We have some lovely pieces." "What was your budget?" "Budget?" Brandon laughed nervously. "No budget. Show me the 3-carat solitaire, the one in the window." The clerk brought out the ring. It sparkled under the halogen lights. It was a beautiful thing, cold and hard and flawless. Brandon didn't even look at the price tag. It was $30,000. To him, it was just a number. It was just Harry is money. He imagined Courtney's face when he gave it to her. He imagined her smiling. He imagined her forgetting about the pills and the forgery and the loan sharks. He thought this ring would fix everything. He thought he could pave over the cracks in his soul with diamonds. "I will take it," he said, slapping his black American Express Centurion card on the glass counter. The clerk took the card. He walked over to the terminal. Brandon drummed his fingers on the glass, whistling a tuneless melody. He was feeling better already. He was a big man spending big money. The clerk inserted the card. He waited. Beep. The clerk frowned. He pulled the card out and wiped the chip on his sleeve. He tried again. Beep. Brandon stopped whistling. "Is there a problem?" he asked. "It says declined, sir," the clerk said, keeping his voice low. Brandon laughed. "That is impossible. That is a black card. It has no limit." "Run it again." The clerk ran it again. This time the machine let out a longer, harsher beep. A message flashed on the screen. "Refer to issuer, retain card. Sir, the machine is telling me to keep the card." The clerk said, his face hardening. "What?" Brandon shouted. "Give me that back. It must be a glitch. My dad, I have millions in that account." He reached for his wallet. He pulled out a Visa. "Try this one," he snapped. The clerk sighed and ran the Visa. Declined. "Try the MasterCard." Declined. Brandon was sweating now. The other customers were staring. The security guard near the door took a step closer, his hand resting on his belt. "There is a mistake," Brandon stammered. His hands were shaking so hard he dropped his wallet. Credit cards spilled onto the floor. He scrambled to pick them up, looking like a desperate child. "I need to call the bank," he said. He pulled out his phone and dialed the VIP service line. He expected to hear the concierge. He expected to hear a polite voice apologizing for the inconvenience. Instead, he heard a recorded message, a cold, robotic voice that sounded remarkably like the voice of judgment. "We are sorry. This account has been frozen due to suspicious activity. Please visit your local branch with 2 forms of identification to restore access." Brandon stood there in the middle of the luxury store holding a phone to his ear while the dial tone buzzed. He looked at the ring on the counter. It seemed to be mocking him. Sir, I am going to have to ask you to leave, the clerk said, sliding the ring back into the case and locking it. Brandon looked up. The arrogance was gone. The Playboy facade had crumbled. In its place was pure, unadulterated panic. He realized in that moment that the money wasn't just numbers. The money is the glue holding his entire fake reality together. Without the money, he wasn't a businessman. He wasn't a husband. He wasn't a success. He was just a thief with empty pockets. He turned and ran out of the store. He ran out onto the street into the blinding morning sun. But he couldn't outrun the truth. I sat in Arthur Sterling's office and checked my phone. I saw the alert from the credit card company. Transaction declined, Tiffany & Co., $30,000. I smiled. It was a sad smile, devoid of any joy. It starts, I whispered. I stood up and shook Arthur's hand. Thank you, Arthur, I said. You just saved my life. I walked to the elevator. I had set the trap. I had locked the doors. Now it was time to go back to the swamp and wait for the crocodiles to get hungry. I checked my watch. It was noon. The loan shark wanted his money by 12. Courtney would be checking the bank account right about now, expecting to see the mortgage funds. She was about to find out that the well had run dry. And when the money runs dry, the rats start to eat each other. I sat in my truck watching the city move around me. My phone buzzed on the dashboard. It was a picture of a happy family on the screen. Me, Martha, and Brandon on his graduation day. It was the contact photo for my son, his home line. But I knew who was really calling. I let it ring twice before picking up. I needed my voice to sound tired. I needed to sound like the beaten man they wanted me to be. Hello, I answered, my voice cracking just enough to be convincing. Dad, is that you? It was Courtney. Her voice had undergone a miraculous transformation. Gone was the screeching harpy from the wedding. Gone was the cold voice from the intercom. In their place was sweetness, a sugary, toxic sweetness that made my skin crawl. It is me, Courtney, I said. What do you want? Oh, Dad. I am so glad you answered, she said, and I could practically hear the fake tears in her voice. We have been so worried about you. Brandon has been driving around all morning looking for you. Where are you? I am safe, I said, keeping it vague. I am just thinking. Dad, listen about last night. She continued, breathless with urgency. I was drunk. I was so stressed about the wedding planning, and the wine went to my head. I said terrible things, things I didn't mean. And Brandon, well, he is just devastated. He has been crying on the sofa for hours. We feel awful, Dad. I looked at the tracking app on my laptop. Brandon was not crying on the sofa. He was currently speeding down Commonwealth Avenue, probably racing home after his credit card was declined. But I played along. You should feel awful, Courtney, I said slowly. You locked me out of my own home. You threw Martha's picture in the mud. I know, she sobbed. And we are going to fix it. We brought the picture inside Dad. We cleaned it off. It is right back on the mantelpiece where it belongs. Please come home. We want to make it up to you. We are cooking a big dinner. Just the three of us. Family style. I closed my eyes. The lie was so smooth. If I hadn't seen the painting with the mustache drawn on it, if I hadn't heard them plotting my murder, I might have believed her. That was the scary part. She was a professional manipulator. Why the sudden change of heart, Courtney? I asked, pushing just a little to see how she reacted. Because we love you, she said without hesitation. And honestly, Dad, we realized we cannot do this without you. You are the patriarch. This house, it feels empty without you. Please just come over. We can talk about the living arrangements. Maybe we were too hasty about the nursing home. Maybe you can stay in the guest suite for a while. The guest suite. My own master bedroom was now the guest suite in her mind. But then came the hook. "Oh, and Dad," she added casually. Too casually. "There is just one tiny piece of paperwork the lawyers sent over. It is nothing really, just a confirmation of the residency transfer so we can put you on our insurance plan. You know, for your health, we want to make sure you are covered." There it was. The desperation. The bank must have told them the forged deed wasn't enough for a same-day loan. They needed a wet signature from the original owner to bypass the fraud check. They needed me to sign my own death warrant. I waited a long beat. I let the silence stretch until I heard her breathing hitch on the other end. "I do not know, Courtney," I said. "I am very tired." "Please, Dad," she begged. "For Brandon. He really needs to see you. He wants to apologize man to man. Come at 7. We will have your favorite wine." I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It was 2 p.m. That gave me 5 hours. 5 hours to prep the team. 5 hours to get Jameson in position. "Okay," I said softly. "I will come. I want to see my son." "Oh, thank you, Dad." "Thank you," she squealed. "You won't regret this. See you at 7. She hung up. I stared at the phone. "I won't regret this." That was the only honest thing she had said. I wouldn't regret it. But she certainly would. I started the engine of the truck. The rumble of the V8 was comforting. I wasn't going into that house as a victim anymore. I was going in as the Trojan horse. I drove to a small barber shop in the North End. It wasn't the fancy salon Courtney went to where they charged $100 for a trim. It was run by an old Italian man named Sal, who had been cutting my hair since I was 30. "Harry, you look like hell," Sal said when I walked in. "Fix me up, Sal," I said, sitting in the chair. "Shave the beard, high and tight on the sides. I have a business meeting tonight." Sal lathered my face with hot foam. The razor scraped against my skin, removing the gray stubble, removing the exhaustion. As the hair fell away, I saw Harrison Caldwell looking back at me in the mirror. The eyes were sharp. The jaw was set. After the haircut, I went to the dry cleaners where I kept my emergency suit. It was a navy blue Brioni tailored to fit my shoulders perfectly. I put it on in the dressing room. I tied the silk tie with a double Windsor knot. I polished my shoes until I could see my reflection in the leather. I looked like a CEO. I looked like the man who owned the building, not the man who slept behind it. I checked my equipment. The digital recorder was taped to the small of my back. The micro camera was pinned to my lapel, looking like a simple American flag pin. My phone was fully charged and transmitting my location to Jameson, his private line. I was ready. I drove back to Beacon Hill and parked a block away. I sat in the truck and watched the sun go down. I watched the streetlights flicker on. At 6:55, a black SUV pulled up to the corner. I couldn't see inside the tinted windows, but I saw the license plate. It was Jameson, his personal vehicle. The cavalry had arrived. I texted him one word: "Wait." Then I stepped out of the truck. The wind was whipping down the street, but I walked tall. I walked past the alleyway where my things were still rotting in garbage bags. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes on the front door. I walked up the granite steps. The keypad was still flashing red. Locked. I raised my hand and rang the doorbell. I waited. The door opened. Brandon stood there. He was wearing a fresh shirt, but his eyes were frantic. He looked like a man who had been running from a ghost all day, only to find it standing on his doorstep. "Dad," he said, his voice thin and reedy. "Hello, son," I said, stepping past him into the foyer. The smell of roast beef wafted from the kitchen. It smelled like home. But underneath it, I smelled the perfume. Courtney appeared from the living room wearing a modest dress, her hair pulled back, trying to look like the dutiful daughter-in-law. Harry, she beamed, spreading her arms wide. Welcome home. I looked at her. I looked at the shark smile plastered on her face. I looked at the way her eyes darted to my suit, assessing the cost, assessing the change in my demeanor. I didn't smile back. Hello, Courtney, I said. I heard you have some papers for me to sign. Let us eat first, she said nervously, gesturing to the dining room table which was set with my good china. We have plenty of time. No, I said, walking straight toward the living room. I am not hungry. Let us get business out of the way. I want to see this insurance paperwork. I walked into the center of the room. I stood on the exact spot where I had stood the night before. I looked at the spot on the rug where Brandon had picked up the poison pills. Courtney exchanged a look with Brandon. A look that said, stick to the plan. She walked over to the sideboard and picked up a folder. Right, she said. Well, it is just standard stuff, really. Just confirming that we are taking care of you. She handed me the folder. I opened it. It wasn't insurance paperwork. It was a quitclaim deed. A document that would legally transfer 100% of the property rights to Brandon and Courtney Caldwell, effectively immediately waiving all my future claims. It was a death sentence for my assets. I looked up at them. Do you have a pen? I asked. Courtney's eyes lit up. She pulled a gold Mont Blanc pen from her pocket. Here, Dad, she said. Use this one. I took the pen. I felt the weight of it. I looked at Brandon. He was sweating. He was looking at his shoes again. Are you sure this is what you want, Brandon? I asked, giving him one last chance. One final opportunity to save his soul. Just sign it, Dad, he whispered. Please. I clicked the pen. Okay, I said. If this is what family means to you, I bent over the table and lowered the pen to the paper. But I wasn't signing my name. I was preparing to give the signal that would bring their world crashing down. The moment I stepped across the threshold of the penthouse, I felt a physical wave of nausea hit me. It was not just the smell of heavy perfume and expensive cologne that filled the air. It was the sensation of violation. This was the home where I had carried Martha across the threshold. This was the floor where I had taught Brandon to walk. This was the kitchen where we had cooked Thanksgiving dinners for 30 years. But tonight, it felt like a stranger's house. It felt like a desecrated temple. The living room was crowded. There must have been 20 people crammed into the space. I recognized some of them from the wedding reception. They were Courtney's friends. The kind of people who looked like they had been manufactured in a factory that produced shallow influencers. The men were wearing loafers without socks, and the women were holding their phones up, recording everything for their stories. When I walked in, the chatter died instantly. It was like someone had pulled the plug on a stereo. 40 eyes turned to look at me. I could feel the weight of their judgment. To them, I was not Harrison Caldwell, the man who built half of Boston. I was just the prop. I was the senile old man who had ruined the wedding. I was the crazy father-in-law who had to be managed. I heard the whispers as I walked through the foyer. That is him. He looks so frail. I heard he tried to hit her. Poor Courtney having to deal with that. I kept my face blank. I kept my back slightly hunched, playing the part they expected. Inside my chest, my heart was beating with the steady rhythm of a sledgehammer, but on the outside, I was just a tired old man in a suit. Courtney appeared from the crowd. She was wearing a white silk dress that shimmered under the lights. She looked like an angel, but I knew she was the devil in couture. She hooked her arm through mine. Her grip was tight, painful. Her nails dug into my bicep like talons. Dad, she exclaimed, her voice high and bright, performing for her audience. You made it. We were so worried you would get lost on the way. She was painting the narrative with every word, reinforcing the idea that my mind was gone. I looked at her. I saw the sweat on her upper lip. I saw the way her eyes darted toward the clock on the wall. She was terrified. She needed that signature before the clock struck midnight on her debts. "I am here, Courtney," I said, my voice low. "Where is my son?" "He is right here," she said, steering me through the crowd. We walked past the beautiful Italian leather sofa I had bought last year. I made a move to sit down on it to rest my legs, but Courtney pulled me forward. "Oh no, Dad, not there," she said with a tight smile. "That is for the guests. You know how you spill things lately. Let us put you in the kitchen where it is easier to clean up." A ripple of sympathetic laughter went through the room. Poor Courtney, having to treat her father-in-law like a toddler. She marched me into the kitchen. The granite island was covered in platters of food that nobody was eating. In the corner away from the comfort of the living room was a single metal bar stool. It was hard and cold and had no back support. "Sit here," she ordered, pushing me down. I sat. I rested my hands on my knees. I looked up at Brandon, who was standing by the wine fridge. He was holding a glass of red wine with both hands, knuckles white. He looked like a ghost. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at the floor, staring at the spot where he had betrayed me the night before. "Hello, Brandon," I said. He flinched. He looked up, and for a second I saw the panic in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, maybe to apologize, maybe to warn me, but Courtney cut him off. "Brandon is just so happy you are here, Dad," she said, stepping between us, blocking my view of my son. "We all are. Now let us get the boring stuff out of the way so we can celebrate." She reached under the counter and pulled out the folder. The quitclaim deed, the document that would strip me of everything I had worked for since I was 18 years old. She placed it on the counter in front of me. She smoothed it out with her hand lovingly, as if it were a holy text. The room had gone silent again. Everyone was watching. They didn't know what the paper was. They probably thought it was a medical form or a power of attorney. They were watching the spectacle of the old man surrendering his authority. Courtney pulled the gold pen from her pocket. She clicked it. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. "Here you go, Dad," she said, holding it out. "Just sign right there at the bottom. It is just the insurance confirmation like we talked about. It proves that we are taking care of you. It proves you are not angry with us anymore." I took the pen. My hand trembled slightly. Not from age, from the sheer effort of holding back the rage that wanted to explode out of my throat. I looked at the paper. I saw the legal jargon. I saw the words irrevocable transfer. I saw the clause that waived my right to live in the property. I looked up at the crowd. I saw the smirk on the face of one of Courtney, his friends, a young man in a pink shirt who was filming this on his phone. He thought this was funny. He thought this was content. I looked at Courtney. She was practically vibrating with anticipation. Her eyes were locked on the tip of the pen. "Is this what you really want, Courtney?" I asked softly. "You want me to sign my life away?" She laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. "Don't be dramatic, Dad. It is just paperwork. It is for your own good. We are protecting you. Now sign it. Please. The insurance company needs it by tonight." I looked at Brandon again over her shoulder. "Son," I said, "do you have anything to say?" Brandon looked at his wife. He looked at the loan shark debt hanging over their heads. He looked at the luxury apartment. "Just sign it, Dad," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Just do it so we can be a family again." A family. He had a strange definition of family. "Okay," I said. I leaned over the counter. I put the tip of the pen to the paper. Courtney let out a breath she had been holding. She thought she had won. She thought the old lion was finally dead. I wrote the first letter of my name. H. Then I stopped. Courtney frowned. "What is wrong, Dad?" "The pen works fine." I lifted the pen. I looked at the ink on the page. I forgot my glasses, I said. Courtney rolled her eyes. A murmur of annoyance went through the room. You do not need glasses to sign your name, Harry. She snapped, her patience fraying at the edges. Just scribble it. It doesn't have to be perfect. I cannot sign what I cannot read, Courtney, I said, raising my voice just a little so it carried to the back of the room. That is the first rule of business. Never sign a contract you haven't read. And since this is just insurance paperwork, surely you do not mind if I read the fine print. I reached into my breast pocket. I didn't pull out reading glasses. I pulled out the orange pill bottle, the one she had thrown in the trash, the one I had retrieved from the garbage bag in the alleyway before I came upstairs. Courtney's face went white. It was the color of old paper. She froze. What is that? She whispered. This, I said, holding the bottle up to the light. I found this outside. It has my name on it. Harrison Caldwell. Prescription for heart medication. I turned the bottle in my hand. The pills rattled inside. But you know, Courtney, something is funny. I took one of these to the lab this afternoon, just to be safe. And do you know what they told me? The room was deathly silent now. The guests could sense the shift in the atmosphere. The predator had just become the prey. They told me these aren't heart pills, I said, my voice hardening into steel. They told me they are sugar and caffeine. I looked at Brandon. He was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face. And I was wondering, Courtney, why would my loving daughter-in-law who wants to protect me swap my life-saving medication for poison? Courtney took a step back. She knocked over a wine glass. It shattered on the floor, but nobody looked at it. You are crazy, she hissed. You are senile. You do not know what you are talking about. Give me that bottle. She lunged for my hand. I caught her wrist. I didn't catch it like an old man. I caught it with the grip of a man who had spent 40 years bending steel and carrying lumber. I squeezed. She cried out in pain. Let go of me, she screamed. Brandon, help me, he is hurting me. Brandon didn't move. He was paralyzed by the truth. I stood up from the stool. I didn't look frail anymore. I stood to my full height of 6 feet 2 inches. I released her wrist and she stumbled back, rubbing the red marks on her skin. I am not signing this, Courtney, I said, picking up the deed and tearing it in half. The sound of the ripping paper was louder than a gunshot. And I am not going to the nursing home. I looked at the camera lens of the guy in the pink shirt. You might want to keep filming, son, I said to him. The best part is coming up. I looked at the front door. It was 7:15 exactly. Right on cue, the heavy oak door imploded inward with a deafening crash. I held the gold Mont Blanc pen suspended over the crisp white paper of the deed. The ink tip hovered just millimeters above the line that would strip me of my legacy. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the shallow breathing of the guests who were watching this spectacle with morbid curiosity. They were waiting for the old man to surrender. They were waiting for the final act of the tragedy. But I was not writing a tragedy. I was writing a trap. I knew that Jameson was outside. I knew the police were in position. But I needed one last thing. I needed a confession. I needed Courtney to say the quiet part out loud. I needed her to admit her intent to defraud and her intent to harm, not just on video, but directly into the microphone taped to my chest. I needed her to seal her own fate with her own words. So I let my hand tremble. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. I let the tremors start in my fingers and travel up my arm until my whole shoulder was shaking. I looked up at Courtney with wide, watery eyes, making myself look small and confused. I cannot do it, and I stammered, my voice pitching up into a whine. My hands, they just won't work. I am so useless. I opened my fingers and let the heavy gold pen slip. It hit the granite countertop with a loud clatter and rolled onto the floor, bouncing near Courtney's high heels. Courtney let out a sharp hiss of frustration. It was the sound of a woman who was losing her patience with a stubborn child. She bent down and snatched the pen off the floor. When she stood up, her fake smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure venom. "For God's sake, Harry," she snapped, shoving the pen back into my hand and wrapping her fingers around mine, forcing a grip. "Just hold it tight. It is not difficult. It is just a signature. Stop making this a scene." I looked at her. I looked at Brandon, who was still cowering by the wine fridge. Then I looked back at the paper. "Courtney," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I just need to know one thing before I sign." What she demanded, leaning in close. Her perfume was overpowering, a cloying scent of gardenias meant to hide the smell of her desperation. "If I sign this," I asked, looking deep into her eyes, "if I give you the house, can I stay? Will you really let me live in the guest suite? Or will you send me away?" I needed her to answer. The microphone was right there, hidden behind the lapel of my jacket. It was only 6 inches from her mouth. Courtney looked around the room. The guests were too far away to hear us. Brandon was too busy staring at the floor. She thought she was safe. She thought she was whispering to a senile old fool who would forget her words in 5 minutes. She leaned in until her lips were brushing my ear. I could feel the heat of her breath. "Listen to me, you old leech," she whispered, and her voice was like ice. "As soon as you sign this paper, I am calling the ambulance. I am sending you to the cheapest state-run facility I can find, a place where they tie you to the bed and feed you through a tube." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't flinch. I let her continue. "I need this house, Harry," she hissed. "I need the money. I owe people who kill for less than what I owe. So you are going to sign this deed, and then you are going to disappear. You are worthless to me alive. You are just a signature. So sign the damn paper, or I will make your last days a living hell. Got you." The words were recorded. The threat was captured. The confession of financial duress and malicious intent was now digital evidence stored on a server in a van down the street. I pulled back slightly and looked at her. She was smiling again, that tight, fake smile for the benefit of the audience. "Okay, Courtney," I said, my voice suddenly steady. "I understand." "Good," she said, tapping the paper. "Sign." I adjusted my grip on the pen. The shaking stopped. My hand became as steady as a rock. I looked at the signature line. I lowered the pen to the paper. The black ink flowed smoothly. Courtney let out a breath of relief. She was watching the tip of the pen, mesmerized. She was counting the millions in her head. She was already spending the money. But I did not write Harrison Caldwell. I wrote the letter L, then the letter O, then another O, then a K. Courtney frowned. She squinted at the paper. "What are you doing?" she asked. "That is not your name." I ignored her. I continued writing. B-E-H-I-N-D. I wrote with bold, confident strokes, the handwriting of a draftsman, the handwriting of a man who drew blueprints for skyscrapers. Courtney's confusion turned to panic. She tried to pull the paper away, but I slammed my hand down on it, pinning it to the counter. Y-O-U. I finished the sentence. "Look behind you." Courtney stared at the words. Her lips moved silently, reading them. "Look behind you," she whispered. She looked up at me, and for the first time she really saw me. She didn't see the frail old man she had created in her mind. She saw the man who had survived poverty. She saw the man who had survived the death of his wife. She saw the man who had built a dynasty from nothing. She saw the fire in my eyes, and it terrified her. Why, I asked, my voice booming through the silent kitchen, no longer whispering, no longer acting. Why do you think the front door has been unlocked for the last 5 minutes, Courtney? Her eyes went wide. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax statue. She slowly turned her head. She turned toward the foyer. She turned toward the heavy oak door that she thought was her shield against the world. Brandon saw it too. He looked up from his wineglass. The guests stopped filming. The silence in the room was absolute, and in that silence we heard the sound of heavy boots on the hardwood floor. Not one pair, but a dozen. We heard the distinct metallic click of a safety being disengaged. We heard the rustle of tactical gear. Courtney let out a small whimper. It was the sound of a balloon losing all its air. She looked back at me one last time. "Dad," she whispered. I capped the gold pen with a solid click. I slid it into my breast pocket next to the camera. "I am not your dad," I said, cold and final. I pointed past her shoulder. "Meet your new landlords." The world seemed to slow down. The guests scrambled back, knocking over chairs. Brandon dropped his wineglass and red liquid pooled on the floor like blood. Courtney stood frozen, trapped between the man she had tried to destroy and the justice that was coming for her. I picked up my glass of water and took a sip. It was cool and refreshing. The play was over. The curtain was falling, and the applause was about to be replaced by the sound of sirens. The heavy oak door didn't just swing open, it seemed to disintegrate under the sheer force of the entry team. Wood splinters flew through the air like shrapnel sparkling in the chandelier light, before settling on the expensive Persian rug. For a split second, nobody moved. The scene was frozen in a tableau of absolute shock. Courtney stood with her mouth open, the color draining from her face until she looked like a corpse in a silk dress. Brandon was staring at the door with wide, terrified eyes, his hands trembling so violently that he looked like he was having a seizure. The guests who just moments ago were laughing and drinking my wine were now statues of fear, their smartphones still raised, but recording a nightmare instead of a party. Then the silence shattered. "Police department. Get down. Everybody get down on the ground now." The command was a roar that shook the crystal glasses in the cabinets. It came from everywhere at once. Men in black tactical gear flooded into the penthouse, moving with the fluid, deadly precision of a wolf pack. They didn't look like the friendly neighborhood officers Courtney might have expected. These were SWAT operators. They wore helmets with face shields, heavy Kevlar vests, and they carried assault rifles that were pulled tight against their chests. The illusion of Courtney, his high society life, evaporated instantly. One moment this was an exclusive cocktail party in Beacon Hill, and the next it was a crime scene. Screams erupted from the living room. The influencers and social climbers who had been mocking me 5 minutes ago were now scrambling over each other to obey the commands. I watched as a young man in a linen suit dove behind the sofa, knocking over a tray of hors d'oeuvres. I watched a woman drop her phone and cover her head with her hands, her diamond bracelets clattering against the hardwood floor. Nobody looked at me with pity anymore. Now they looked at the floor, praying they wouldn't be caught in the crossfire. Courtney didn't move. She couldn't move. Her brain had simply locked up. She stood by the kitchen island, still clutching the edge of the granite counter, as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. She looked from the armed men to me, and then back to the armed men. Her narcissism was fighting a losing battle against reality. She opened her mouth to speak, to charm, to manipulate, but no words came out. Chief Miller stepped through the broken doorway. He was a large man with broad shoulders and a face that had seen every kind of evil the city of Boston had to offer. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He was wearing his dress uniform, his gold badge gleaming under the lights. He scanned the room, his eyes cold and calculating. He ignored the guests cowering on the floor. He ignored Brandon, who had slumped against the refrigerator. His eyes locked onto Courtney. "Courtney Caldwell," he boomed, his voice cutting through the panic like a knife. "Step away from the counter and keep your hands where I can see them." Courtney blinked. She finally found her voice, but it was thin and hysterical. "What is happening?" she shrieked. "You cannot do this. This is a private residence. Get out of my house. Do you know who I am?" Chief Miller didn't even blink. He walked toward her, his steps heavy and deliberate. "I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Caldwell," he said calmly. "You are the suspect in a felony investigation. Now step away from the counter." But behind the chief, another figure emerged from the ruined doorway. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the hammer drop. Justice Jameson walked in. He wasn't wearing his judicial robes. He was wearing a long charcoal trench coat and a fedora that shadowed his eyes. He looked like a noir detective from a different era, but the authority he radiated was timeless. In his hand, he didn't hold a gun. He held a folded piece of paper. To Courtney, it might have looked like just another document, but to me I knew it was far more dangerous than any rifle in the room. It was a warrant signed by the highest court in the state. Jameson stopped in the middle of the kitchen. He looked at the shattered wine glass on the floor. He looked at the torn pieces of the deed on the counter. And then he looked at me. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, a signal between old friends. The trap had sprung shut. He turned to Courtney. "Mrs. Caldwell," Jameson said, his voice deep and resonant, filling the room with the gravity of the law. "I am Justice Jameson of the Massachusetts Supreme Court, and I suggest you do exactly what the chief says." Courtney looked at Jameson. She recognized him. Everyone in Boston recognized him. He was a fixture on the news, a man known for his harsh sentences and his unshakable moral compass. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a noise complaint. This was the end. She looked at me, her eyes wide with betrayal. "You called him," she whispered. "You set me up." I stood up from the metal stool. My legs were steady. My heart was calm. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the gold pen she had forced me to use. I placed it gently on the counter next to the pill bottle. "I didn't set you up, Courtney," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the sobbing of the guests. "You set yourself up. I just turned on the lights." Brandon finally made a sound. It was a low moan of despair. He was curled up on the floor by the wine fridge, his hands over his head. He looked like a child trying to hide from a monster in the closet. But the monster wasn't in the closet. The monster was his wife, and he had married her willingly. Chief Miller motioned to two of his officers. They moved in on Courtney. "Place your hands behind your back," Miller ordered. "No!" Courtney screamed, backing away until she hit the refrigerator. "No, you cannot touch me. I am pregnant." The room went silent again. Even the guests stopped crying. I froze. Pregnant. For a second I felt a flicker of doubt. A grandchild. Was it possible? But then I saw her eyes. They were darting around, looking for an exit, looking for leverage. It was the same look she had when she told the police I was senile. It was a lie. A desperate, clawing lie from a drowning woman. Jameson stepped forward. "We have your medical records, Mrs. Caldwell," he said coldly. "We pulled them an hour ago as part of the investigation. You are not pregnant, but you are under arrest." One of the officers grabbed her arm. She tried to pull away, her fingernails scrabbling against the granite, but he was stronger. He spun her around. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Click, click, click. "You are hurting me," she screamed, thrashing against the restraint. "Harry, tell them. Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them I was joking. It was just a prank, Harry. The pills were a joke." I walked over to her. I stood right in front of her, so she had to look at the bruise on my cheek. The bruise she had put there. "It was not a joke when you slapped me," I said softly. "It was not a joke when you forged my signature. And it was certainly not a joke when you swapped my heart medication for poison." I reached out and picked up the orange pill bottle from the counter. I held it up so the chief could see it. Evidence Chief Miller, I said, handing it to him. Miller took the bottle and placed it in an evidence bag. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell, he said. We will add this to the recordings. Recordings, Courtney gasped. Everything you said tonight, I told her, pointing to the American flag pin on my lapel. And everything you did in this apartment for the last 24 hours. It is all on tape, Courtney. Every word, every threat, every plan to sell my home to pay your gambling debts. The fight went out of her. Her shoulders slumped. She looked at the floor, her expensive dress now wrinkled and twisted. She realized there was no way out. The walls she had built around herself, the walls of lies and arrogance, had collapsed. Take her away, Miller said. The officers began to march her toward the door. As she passed the living room, the guests scrambled out of her way as if she were contagious. Her friends, the people she had tried so hard to impress, were now staring at her with disgust. She was no longer the queen of the social scene. She was a pariah. Harry, she wailed as they dragged her through the foyer. Harry, please. I am family. I turned my back on her. I looked at the painting of Martha on the mantelpiece, the one I had rescued from the garbage. Family does not poison family, I said to the empty air. As the door closed behind her, cutting off her screams, the room felt suddenly lighter. The toxic presence was gone. But there was still one piece of business left to attend to. I turned my attention to the man cowering on the floor. My son. Jameson walked over to Brandon. He looked down at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. Get up, son, Jameson said. Stand up and face your father. Brandon slowly uncurled himself. He stood up using the wine fridge for support. He looked terrible. His face was blotchy. His eyes were swollen. He couldn't even look at me. Dad, he whispered. Didn't know. I swear I didn't know she was going to go that far. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had stood by while his wife slapped me. The man who had agreed to put me in a state home. The man who had picked up poison pills and put them back in the bottle. Jameson handed me a different document. It wasn't a warrant. It was a civil paper. I took it and walked over to Brandon. You knew enough, Brandon, I said. You knew right from wrong, and you chose wrong. I pressed the paper against his chest. He grabbed it instinctively. What is this? He asked, his voice trembling. Read it, I said. He looked down. It is a restraining order, I said, and an eviction notice. You have 10 minutes to pack a bag. The officers will escort you out. Dad, please, he cried, reaching out for me. Where am I supposed to go? I have no money. My cards are frozen. I looked at him, and for a moment I saw the little boy on the construction site again. But that boy was gone. I don't know, Brandon, I said. But you are young. You have 2 hands. Maybe you can find a job. Maybe you can build something of your own instead of trying to steal mine. I turned to Chief Miller. Get them all out of here, Chief, I said. I want my house back. Miller nodded and began shouting orders to clear the apartment. I walked to the balcony doors and pushed them open, stepping out into the cold night air. The wind dried the sweat on my forehead. Below me I could see the flashing blue lights of the police cars reflecting off the wet pavement. I saw Courtney being shoved into the back of a cruiser. It was over. The war was won. But as I stood there looking at the city I had built, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. I had saved my fortune. I had saved my life. But I had lost the only family I had left. Jameson stepped out onto the balcony beside me. He didn't say a word. He just handed me a glass of whiskey. We stood there in silence, 2 old men watching the flashing lights, knowing that sometimes the cost of justice is a broken heart. Chief Miller did not scream. He did not need to scream because he held all the cards. He reached into his belt and pulled out a pair of steel handcuffs that caught the light of the chandelier. The sound of the metal ratcheting open was a cold, mechanical noise that silenced the hysterical sobbing in the room. He walked toward Courtney with the heavy inevitability of a tank. He stopped 2 feet in front of her, looking down at the woman who had thought she was untouchable just minutes ago. "Courtney Caldwell," he said, his voice flat and professional. "You are under arrest. The charges are aggravated assault with intent to cause bodily harm, elder abuse in the 1st degree, and grand larceny involving financial fraud." Courtney shook her head violently, her blonde hair whipping around her face. She looked like a cornered animal. She backed up until she hit the granite island, knocking over the bowl of untouched fruit. "No," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You cannot arrest me! This is a civil matter. It is a family dispute." "Look at the paper on the counter." He signed it. "He gave me the house. It is mine. The law says it is mine." She grabbed the torn pieces of the deed, trying to hold them together, as if sheer will could mend the paper and the lie. "Tell him, Harry," she begged, looking at me with wild, desperate eyes. "Tell him you gave it to me. Tell him I own this penthouse." I watched her crumble. I watched the arrogance drain out of her, leaving only the pathetic greed underneath. I stood up from the metal stool. I did not need to hold onto the counter for support anymore. I brushed a speck of invisible dust from the lapel of my navy blue Brioni suit. I adjusted my silk tie. I stood tall, my shoulders squared the way I used to stand when I was inspecting a skyscraper foundation. I walked over to her. I moved into her personal space, forcing her to look up at me. I was not the victim anymore. I was the judge. "You do not own this house, Courtney," I said, my voice calm but projecting to every corner of the room so every single one of her influential friends could hear the truth. "You never owned this house, and neither do I." She blinked, confusion mixing with her terror. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "You bought it. It is in your name." I shook my head slowly, a small cold smile playing on my lips. "I bought this building 20 years ago," I said. "But 10 years ago, after my wife Martha passed away, I placed this entire property into an irrevocable trust. It belongs to the St. Jude Home for Orphaned Children." The room gasped. I saw Jameson in the background nodding solemnly. He knew. He had helped me draw up the papers. "I am just the trustee." "Courtney." I continued, leaning in closer so she could smell the coffee on my breath. "I manage the property. I pay the bills. I have the right to live here until I die. But I do not have the right to sell it. And neither do you." I picked up the torn deed from her hand. "When you forced me to sign this," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "When you tried to mortgage this property to pay your gambling debts, you were not just stealing from an old man. You were stealing from orphans. You were attempting to liquidate the assets of a federally registered charity." I paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. "That makes this a federal crime, Courtney. You are not just going to the county jail. You are going to a federal penitentiary. And the feds do not care about your tears. They do not care about your social status. They only care that you tried to rob children to pay a loan shark." Courtney's knees gave way. She would have collapsed to the floor if Chief Miller hadn't caught her arm. Her face went gray. She realized the magnitude of her mistake. She had tried to play checkers, but I was playing 3-dimensional chess. She looked at Brandon, who was still slumped by the wine fridge. "Brandon," she wailed. "Do something. Tell them." But Brandon said nothing. He stared at me with wide, horrified eyes, realizing that he too had been part of a conspiracy to defraud a charity. He realized that his inheritance, the money he thought he was protecting, never really existed in the way he thought. It was all locked away for a higher purpose, a purpose he was too selfish to understand. Miller spun Courtney around. She didn't fight him this time. She didn't have the strength. He pulled her arms behind her back. "You have the right to remain silent," Miller recited as he snapped the cuffs onto her wrists. The sound of the metal locking click, click, click was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of closure. It was the sound of the world correcting itself. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. "I do not understand." Courtney sobbed, her head hanging low. "We just wanted the money. We just wanted to be free." "You were free, Courtney," I said, watching the officers flank her. "You had a home. You had a husband who loved you. You had my support. But it wasn't enough, was it? You wanted it all. And because you grabbed for everything, you are going to end up with nothing." Miller gave the signal. The officers began to march her toward the door. This was her grand exit. This was the moment she had prepped for all day, dressing up and inviting her friends. But instead of leaving as the new owner of a penthouse, she was leaving as a prisoner. Her friends, the people she had tried so hard to impress, parted like the Red Sea. They held up their phones, capturing every second of her humiliation. They zoomed in on the handcuffs. They zoomed in on her ruined mascara. Tomorrow, this video would be trending in Boston. Her reputation was not just dead, it was incinerated. "Harry!" She screamed one last time as they dragged her through the foyer. "I am sorry. I will sign anything. I will leave, Brandon. Just do not let them take me." I did not answer. I simply picked up my glass of water and took a slow, deliberate sip. I watched her disappear into the hallway, followed by the swarm of police. The door remained open, hanging off its hinges, a broken mouth testifying to the violence of the night. I turned back to the room. The guests were frozen, unsure if they were next. "Get out," I said softly. They didn't move fast enough. I said, "Get out," I roared, my voice echoing off the walls. "Get out of my house before I have you all arrested as accomplices." The panic was instant. They scrambled for their coats, tripping over each other in their haste to escape the blast radius of my anger. They ran past the police, they ran past Brandon. They ran until the penthouse was empty. Finally, it was just me, Jameson, Miller, and my son. I looked at Brandon. He was still on the floor. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a valuable vase and was waiting for the punishment. But I had no punishment left to give. The law would handle Courtney. Life would handle Brandon. I walked over to the balcony doors and pushed them open, letting the cold night air flush out the scent of Courtney's perfume. I looked out at the city lights. Somewhere down there in the dark streets, the St. Jude orphanage was sleeping. The children there didn't know it, but their future was safe. I had protected it. I had lost my family, but I had kept my soul. And as I stood there listening to the sirens fade into the distance, I realized that was enough. The room was quiet now. The chaotic energy of the police raid had dissipated, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and suffocating. The guests were gone. Courtney was gone. The only sound left was the jagged breathing of my son, who was still kneeling on the hardwood floor near the wine fridge. He looked like a man who had survived a shipwreck, only to realize he was stranded on a desert island. I stood by the balcony doors, letting the cold night air cool the sweat on my neck. I watched him for a long moment. I remembered the day he was born. I remembered holding his tiny hand and promising to protect him from the world. I had kept that promise for 30 years. I had shielded him from poverty. I had shielded him from hard labor. I had shielded him from the consequences of his own mediocrity. And that, I realized with a sharp pang of guilt, was my greatest mistake. By protecting him from the rain, I had never taught him how to build a shelter. Brandon looked up. His eyes were red and swollen. His tuxedo shirt was unbuttoned, revealing the pale skin of his chest, which was heaving with sobs. "Dad," he croaked. I did not answer. I walked over to the kitchen island and picked up a thick manila envelope that I had prepared earlier that afternoon. It was heavy. It contained the final pieces of the puzzle. Brandon shuffled forward on his knees. It was a pathetic sight. A grown man crawling like a toddler. "Dad, please," he cried, reaching out for the hem of my trousers. "I am so sorry. I was weak. She made me do it. She told me we had no choice. You have to believe me. I love you, Dad. I never wanted to hurt you." I took a step back, moving out of his reach. "Stand up, Brandon," I said, my voice flat. He sniffed and wiped his nose on his sleeve. He slowly pulled himself up until he was standing. He slumped against the counter, looking defeated. "What happens now?" he whispered. Are you going to press charges against me too?" I looked at the envelope in my hand. Jameson had offered to prosecute Brandon. He had enough evidence to put him away for 5 years as an accomplice. It would have been justice. But I was not just a judge. I was a father. And a father does not put his son in a cage. A father pushes his son out of the nest. "No," I said. "I am not sending you to prison, Brandon." He let out a sob of relief. "Oh, thank God. Thank you, Dad. I knew you would understand. I promise I will make it up to you. I will come back here and help you fix everything. We can start over. I will take care of you." I held up my hand, stopping his stream of empty promises. "You are not listening," I said. "You are not going to prison. But you are not staying here either." I held out the envelope. He looked at it. A flicker of hope sparked in his eyes. He thought it was money. He thought it was a check to help him get back on his feet. He thought the bank of Dad was open for business again. He took the envelope with trembling hands and tore it open. He pulled out the first document. "What is this?" he asked, squinting at the paper. "It is a divorce petition," I said. "I paid for a lawyer to draft it this afternoon. It separates your finances from Courtney's debts. It saves you from being liable for the money she owes the loan sharks. It is a clean break, Brandon. It is the last time I will ever pay to clean up your mess." Brandon stared at the paper. He looked relieved. "And the other thing," I said. He reached into the envelope again. He pulled out a small rectangular piece of paper. It was a bus ticket. A Greyhound ticket. He said, his voice confused. "To Omaha, Nebraska." I nodded. "I have an old friend in Omaha," I said. "He runs a roofing company. It is hard work. It is dirty work. It pays $15 an hour. I called him today. He is expecting you on Monday morning." Brandon looked at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. "Roofing," he stammered. "But Dad, I am a marketing consultant. I have a degree. I cannot work on a roof. It is dangerous. It is hard." I stepped closer to him. "It is honest work, Brandon," I said. "And it is the only offer on the table. You have no home here. You have no money. Your cards are frozen. You are 30 years old, and you have never done an honest day's work in your life. But Omaha," he whined. "Dad, please. Just let me stay in the guest room for a week. Just until I figure things out." I shook my head. "If you stay here, you will never figure things out. You will just wait for me to die so you can take what I built." I pointed to the door. "The bus leaves at midnight from South Station. You have an hour to pack a bag." Brandon looked at the ticket and then back at me. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He saw the wall I had built. He realized finally that there was no door in this wall. He slumped. The reality of his new life crashed down on him. No penthouses, no champagne, no safety net. Just a bus ticket and a hammer waiting for him in Nebraska. He didn't say another word. He turned and walked slowly toward the bedroom he used to share with his wife. I heard the sound of a suitcase zipper. I heard the sound of drawers opening and closing. 10 minutes later, he emerged. He was wearing jeans and a hoodie, carrying a single duffel bag. He looked younger. He looked like the boy I used to know before the money and the greed corrupted him. He stopped at the front door. He looked back at me standing in the middle of the ruined living room. "Goodbye, Dad," he whispered. "Goodbye, son," I said. He opened the door and walked out. I listened to his footsteps fading down the hallway. I listened until I couldn't hear them anymore. I was alone. The silence in the penthouse was different now. It wasn't heavy, it was clean. It was the silence of a job site after the crew has gone home and the foundation is set. I looked around the room. I looked at the white leather sofas Courtney had bought. I looked at the abstract art she had hung on the walls. None of it was me. It was all a costume she had forced this house to wear. I took out my phone and dialed a number. "Hello," a voice answered. "Is this the Habitat for Humanity Restore?" I asked. "Yes, it is. My name is Harry Caldwell. I have a donation for you. A full apartment worth of luxury furniture. Brand new. Italian leather. Designer tables. Everything." "That sounds generous, sir," the voice said. "When would you like us to pick it up?" "Tomorrow morning," I said. "First thing. I want it all gone. I want the space cleared." I hung up. I walked to the kitchen. I found a bottle of wine that Courtney hadn't opened. It was a 1996 Cabernet, one of my favorites that I had saved for a special occasion. I pulled the cork. The sound was a soft pop that echoed in the empty room. I poured a glass. I didn't use the crystal. I used an old coffee mug that said, "World is okayest Dad" on it, a gift Brandon had given me when he was 10. I walked out onto the balcony. The wind had died down. The city of Boston lay spread out before me, a carpet of lights and shadows. I took a sip of the wine. It was rich and complex. It tasted like survival. I looked at the skyline. I saw the buildings I had built. They were still standing, strong, unshakable. They had weathered storms and blizzards, and they were still there, just like me. I had lost a lot today. I had lost my illusions about my family. I had lost the comfort of ignorance. But as I stood there, feeling the cold air in my lungs, I realized I had gained something far more valuable. I had gained my dignity back. I had regained control of my own destiny. I raised my mug to the moon. "Here is to the new foundation," I whispered. I drank the wine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt peace settle over me. The house was empty, but my heart was full of a strange, quiet strength. I was Harry Caldwell. I was a builder, and tomorrow I would start renovating. Not the house, but my life. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. We grow up believing that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water. But my story taught me a hard truth. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. I spent years thinking that giving my son everything was an act of love. But I was wrong. By giving him everything, I took away his ability to earn anything. I created a man who felt entitled to my life instead of grateful for his own. Real love is not about endless giving. It is about having the courage to say no. It is about setting boundaries even when it breaks your heart. I had to lose my son to save him and to save myself. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, but it was the only way to reclaim my dignity. If you are in a situation where you are being used, where you are being disrespected by the people you support, remember this. You are not a checkbook. You are not a doormat. You are a person worthy of respect. Do not be afraid to close the door. Do not be afraid to change the locks. Your peace is worth more than their approval. Thank you for listening to my story. It was not easy to tell, but I hope it gives you strength. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to make a tough choice to protect your peace? I read every single comment. See you in the next story. Stay strong.